It's also armed with surface-to-air missiles, and we should mention it's getting closer to land. It was 70 miles yesterday, now it's 30 miles today, and it's something we're watching. This comes after another troubling development that Russia is deploying a cruise missile in violation of an arms control treaty. Joining us now, Peter Brookes, Heritage Foundation Senior Fellow and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and Naveed Jamali, Reserve Intelligence Officer with the Office of Naval Intelligence and Senior Fellow in the Program on National Security at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. You both have impressive titles, but it buries the lead. The fact is that both of you have had significant interactions with Russians before in a myriad of different ways, professionally speaking. So, Peter, bottom line this for us. What is Russia up to?
Well, look, Jenna, Russia is ambitious, it's anti-U.S., it's anti-West, it's opportunistic, and it's revisionist. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. I mean, we didn't even get into it in this segment, but Russia's also cozying up to the Taliban in Afghanistan. This is a huge issue for us. They're making entrees into Libya, working with people that are currently against the UN-backed government. Russia is expanding, it's spreading its wings. And these are just some of these other things that you mentioned are just part of that. Russia wants to be at the top of the international pyramid of states.
Also, interesting visitor to Moscow I wanted to mention, Naveed. Iranian Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani arrived in Russia yesterday. He's the top of the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, and he decided he needed to pick yesterday of all days to have a meeting in Moscow for several days. He's not supposed to travel, by the way. He's banned from it, but he went anyways. So would you agree with Peter? This is part of a much bigger piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree with Peter. I think it's also important to sort of take a step back and explain exactly why there's a spy ship off the coast in Connecticut and the Russians are deploying potentially a missile here. And I think it has less to do with, I've heard lots of rumors and conspiracy theories, this is a reaction to Flynn, and generally it's not. I mean, this is really a reaction to two things. One is the Marine deployment in Norway. 300 Marines are now there for a year. You have a fairly big NATO operation with 3,000 U.S. troops in Europe, and you have the U.S. Navy presence in the Black Sea, which we should be doing. We have to keep pressure on Russia. So these are pre-planned events, which frankly Russia is reacting to. They're making a point that says, hey, you want to put troops on our border? Hey, we can kind of do the same thing here. And that missile, by the way, Jenna, is, look, it's not meant to be at the United States. The dangerous part about it is that it's a tactical nuke, and I have real concerns that Russia is restarting that program, and that is really a bad path for them to go down, and really a bad path for anyone to go.
You mentioned the ship in the Black Sea. We should also mention, Peter, that we had Russian fighter jets buzz our ship just last week. So, as Naveed points out, there's a little bit of a back and forth here. We have, this is, I should mention, old video of a similar incident that happened. So it has happened before. But Senator McCain says that President Trump is being tested by the Russians. If this administration is being tested, how do we win the test?
Well, you're right. Russia operates through strength and intimidation, and they're looking for acquiescence. I mean, I think that the president is, being very moderate about this right now, moderating his responses to this, because he wants to see how his relationship is going to unfold with Russia. And in fact, he had a very interesting tweet today about Russia taking, the word, took Crimea, which is different. And the president, I think, has been mainstreaming his foreign policy. He embraced the one China policy in his talks with President Xi. He's backing our Asian allies. So I think the president is moderating his views towards Russia. I think he is expressing some concerns about it, and I think it's important for the United States to show strength. I mean, today General Mattis, our Secretary of Defense, is in Europe meeting with NATO members. So we're going to see how this unfolds. But I think there is obviously concerns, and Russians first and foremost understand strength.
Well, and it's interesting. Apparently, Mattis the Pentagon chief was telling our NATO allies to increase their defense spending by year end, or that the U.S. will moderate its commitment. So that's also interesting to balance it. Both of you have for example, Peter, you flew reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union. Naveed, you actually came face-to-face with Russian operatives. And so I'm curious your thoughts just quickly here on the Mike Flynn piece and this New York Times report that's suggesting that campaign officials for Donald Trump were somehow in contact with Russian officials. And there is a part to this about whether or not they knew that they were actually interacting with with Russian intelligence officers. In fact, the New York Times writes this: "It is not unusual for American businessmen to come in contact with foreign intelligence officials, sometimes unwittingly, in countries like Russia and Ukraine." I'm just curious your take on this. Is it possible that some campaign officials had interactions with Russians and didn't actually know that they were Russian intelligence officials, Naveed?
Absolutely. Yes, I think there's a very delicate dance when it comes to recruitment and sort of running an asset, which is not to say that anyone on the Trump campaign or the president himself or the general were an asset, but there's a careful dance. And part of that is what we call pitching, which happens all the time, which is literally where an intelligence officer simply makes contact. And it's almost like, oddly enough, Jenna, like selling a product. They do this hundreds of times, and maybe out of 100, one person is deemed worthy or interested in moving to the next level. So initial contact doesn't mean that you are now going to become an asset and under direction by the Russians. So absolutely, if you're traveling to Russia, it is likely, if you're someone of note, if you're someone connected to the government, it's very likely that the Russians are going to take a pass at you, take a look at you, and perhaps make contact. And look, a majority of the people where this happens to, they dutifully report it back. So just because you have contact with intelligence officers doesn't necessarily mean that you are now going to become, a quote-unquote asset.
We're going to have to leave it there. There's certainly more to that conversation. Peter and Naveed, great to have you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Intrigue in North Korea. A woman under arrest for the murder of the North Korean dictator's